Now, there's just a slight change of mood now because we've had a number of members of the press here, and they're invited to be here up until this point. But from now on, we move into a more confidential mode where we will not have any press present. And I would advise or encourage everybody here to be very candid in what they say because it's off the record. Now for panel one. Now, what we're going to do each time is I'll introduce the chairman, and he will or she will introduce the panel members. So the chairman of panel one on using design thinking to evolve new supply chain configurations is Don Hicks. Don is the founder and CEO of Llamasoft Incorporated, a software firm in the supply chain space. He's known as a visionary in the field of supply chain. He's an author and a sought-after speaker. He's been a consultant to many companies. By background, he went to West Point and University of Michigan for his MBA. His company, Llamasoft, is based nearby in Ann Arbor, and he has a personal interest in using supply chain technology for the distribution of medicines throughout the world, particularly to poorer countries. Don Hicks.
So we're going to do several things at once. We're going to have our panel come on up and take their seats. And I think they can provide a better introduction to themselves than I'm capable of doing, so we'll do that. In the interest of efficiency, I'm just going to keep rocking and rolling while these guys get wired up. So great talks already, very interesting. And now it's my privilege to usher in what we, as the panel over breakfast, decided was clearly the most important topic of the entire conference. Actually, second, there's a book launch coming. Third, after the dinner. But it's the third most important thing we're going to be doing here. And that's talking about design. Now, design means a lot of different things to a lot of people. For example, I'm going to design my speech not to run over by starting my stopwatch. So let's start with the basics to get the thinking going. When I talk about design, what do I mean? What am I saying? Well, we're here in Athens, and this is a great opportunity for me to misquote a Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, when I say that for us, certainly at Llamasoft, we talk about design as destiny. Design is the situation that you have. Many of you, maybe not, are familiar with the work of Herbert Simon, who spent a lot of time talking about systems and systems thinking. And what Herbert Simon said about design is that a person is a designer who's trying to change an existing situation into a preferred situation. And it's just words, but there's a lot of depth in there. And I invite you to go into the depth with me for a second. So at Llamasoft, we make software and tools and technologies that help people design and redesign supply chains. Now, for us, a design is not just infrastructure. And I really liked the slide that Richard had talking about the different aspects of design. For us, we like to take a systems approach to this and say that a supply chain's design is basically all of the objects in the supply chain and their interactions. And again, it's stealing from systems ideas, all put together to perform a certain type of function. Now, what kind of function is it? How is that working? What you see, if you think about it, is there's so much technology and so much money spent on supply chain planning, supply chain execution, technology, optimization. I'd submit to you, these are all wonderful attempts to make the best of probably not a great situation. That is to say, they're all attempts to squeeze performance out of a design that already exists. You're making the best out of your situation. But if you manage to get your stapler out and staple some wings onto the pig, it's not going to fly. And if you take a chicken and you stick a snout on it, you're not going to be making bacon. The fact is, you can't overcome the supply chain's basic design. I would argue that the things that you're grappling with, all of the compensatory mechanisms and technologies that you try to bolt on, are trying to overcome flaws and problems inherent in the very basic nature, the design of the supply chain itself. You're stuck with it. And yet, paradoxically, most of the money and most of the effort is spent on working on the supply chain you have, trying to make it work better. So, are you stuck with that? Are you stuck with the situation that you're in? Is your design fixed? Is it truly the destiny that you're stuck with? Well, John Gatorna put the word dynamic in all of the books and all of the research that he's done. John believes that perhaps you can change your destiny. Perhaps design is something that is not something that happens to you and you're stuck with it, but something that is intentional. And what could be more profound than saying that this idea that you can, if indeed your design is your destiny, that perhaps, just perhaps, you can change your destiny. You can jump onto a different path. Now imagine that. You spend all of this time trying to optimize and improve a supply chain's performance, and yet, how much time are you spending trying to figure out what supply chain you should be on? One of the core concepts about dynamic alignment is revisiting the design of the supply chain. And John's very expansive and full view of this is really a business system, not just the objects, not just the rules, but the people and the IT. Now, this is all very interesting, but if you look at it, how many companies out there have a dedicated design group? Does your company have a supply chain design team that's constantly reworking, envisioning the future, modeling it on out to try to determine what supply chain should I be operating? It seems to me there's a lot of supply chains out there that have been explicitly designed to deliver really bad service at a high cost while polluting the environment. It takes a lot of effort to design some of the supply chains that are as poorly performing as are out there. And yet we pour billions into technologies to try to make the chicken give us bacon. Why don't you try a little bit of evolution? Try some design. The topic of this panel is about design thinking. And design thinking really goes back to the seminal article from Tim Brown from IDEO, who took a look at innovation and creativity and said these are things that we know from the design community. And design often, people say, well, design, you mean packaging. What does it look like? Well, no. Tim actually investigated the concept of innovation around product design and creating new things and disruptive things that were loved by customers. And he said there's some principles here that we can transplant, as Richard said, from one field to another. And so design thinking is a methodology and a formalism that says, really, let's shake up the box. Let's get out of the box. Let's come up with some new ideas. But it's all about trying to see if you can revisit, are you stuck with the design you have, or can you get out of it? So is design important? Are you stuck with the design that you have? Is there a way, perhaps, to shake out of that and change your destiny, like Heraclitus might have gone for, who said he never stepped into the same river twice? Or is it like Parmenides, you're just stuck with the design you have? Is it important even? Can we do it? That's a question and a series of questions I put to the panel, along with others. And I also told them explicitly, completely ignore everything I talk about and talk about what you want to. Just be interesting. So with that, I'm going to pause on over here, and we're going to go through and have a couple of statements from the panel. I don't know what our ideas are for questions and things, but once we're done talking, it's a free-for-all. So shout, scream, yell. That'll make it more interesting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Don. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to Richard for setting the scene so well. And thanks to John for inviting me here, despite the wonderful relationship we've had over the last 30 or 40 years, John. And John is that old, I promise you. He doesn't look it. But it's great to be here. So let me just tell you who I am, Alan Waller. I'm down here as Leaders in Supply Chain, LUPEG, Cranfield School of Management, FSO Consulting. Yes, I'm one of those. I've spent over 40 years in management consultancy with PricewaterhouseCoopers as a partner, and the last 12 years with Solving FSO, now FSO Consulting. I've also spent over 40 years as an academic, Leicester School of Management, Warwick University Business School. I set up the centre at Cranfield that Richard talked about, and also set up the world's first master's programme in logistics in 1980. Now you may say, how could I have spent 40 years in consulting and 40 years in academia, having spent many years also in the steel industry, in production management, management services, as a control engineer? That would make me 142 years old. Well, I may look 142 years old, but I promise you I'm not. The reason why I've done all these things and I'm still only 52 is that I've done them at the same time. So when I was a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was also invited to go back and run the Cranfield Centre after Professor Jim Cooper died. When I was at Cranfield, I was consulting for PricewaterhouseCoopers and more recently FSO Consulting. So I've been working in consultancy and academia and bringing the two together based upon my industrial experience. So that's great. Just following up the points that Don has so ably made. I mean, is this stuff new? Well, I'm old enough to know it's not new. If I go back 30 years, I was doing this stuff with John, my very good friend here. So in the task of design, in terms of designing supply chains, designing them for purpose, making them fit for purpose, is not new. What is different is that the process is very different. It works at a different level. The challenges are very different. And so it is not new, but it is changed dramatically. I mean, just to tell you that John and myself used to exchange visits between the UK and Australia. John used to come over a couple of times a year, 30 years a year, and he'd spend a couple of weeks in the UK and around Europe. And he'd go through the technical updates, what was happening, meet the key people, extensive visits and discussions. And he always said that 2 weeks was never enough to actually digest all of that before he took it back and worked on it down under. People like myself and Mona Christopher used to go over to Australia and we'd do the same thing. We'd go through the whole of the technical developments in Australia, meet all the key people, extensively research all the work that had been done. And we did that every 6 months or so. And so we went over for a visit and did all of that. And then in the second hour of our visit, we would do the other things. No, John, I'm only kidding. John has made a great contribution, and Australia is obviously the hotbed of culture and technical development and innovation, as it has always been. But we've got a tremendous gratitude to John for leading the way and bringing us here today. And John has always been very strong in coming forward. So it's not new. The first, but it's different. The first supply chain strategic study I got involved with in a serious way was in 1975, 30 years ago, where I did a European strategy study. It was called Distribution Strategy in those days for Mont Edison. This is all in the public domain, looking at their European structure, which had never even been documented before, let alone designed. The project took 3 months to collect data. It took 3 months to write the model. It was written in Fortran 4D, and then it took another 3 months to validate and verify the model. I mean, you can't believe, Don, that this is the state of the art 30 years ago. So that was the process, and it's changed, obviously, dramatically. Whereas now we have, through a lot of work by a lot of people, we have the modelling systems available. And we've got Supply Chain Guru, which we in FSO Consulting use, for example, as our modelling partner. So we don't have to worry about the modelling systems. They are there, and they're robust, and they're flexible. And the focus has moved from the model to the overall process. But the overall process is actually far more challenging than it was for a number of reasons. The world has got bigger, supply chains have got more extensive, fragmentation, complexity, differentiation between supply chains for different customers, different group of customers, different products, different group of products, different parts of the world. Every supply chain is essentially global, if we look at it at an end-to-end basis. And the whole process of design is embedded in the process not just of planning per se, but strategic planning. Supply chain is by definition strategic. It affects the total business over a long period of time. Therefore, it ticks the strategy box. And if it ticks the strategy box, then it has to be integrated with business strategy. And if it's integrated with business strategy, that actually then tilts it straight into the strategic arena with all the complexity and the risks involved in businesses. So design is not the same as planning. Design is an element of the total planning process, but for supply chain it's strategic. Is it important? Well, it's critically important. I mean, it is well researched that the shape of a logistics or a supply chain system, the shape of that, the structure, fixes 60% of the costs of the business. In other words, no matter how much you work on tactical changes and operational excellence, if you have the wrong structure, 60% of your costs are not influenceable. So it's absolutely critical to get that 60% right. So that takes us straight into strategic planning and design of the total system. If it is important, why are not more people doing it? Well, I suggest they are doing it. I did a very important piece of research recently through Cranfield, working with Richard Wilding, sponsored by FSO Consulting, on the realities of strategic planning, the whole process of developing and implementing strategic change involving supply chain. A global study based upon the views and inputs from people like yourselves all around the world, but also analysed by the Supply Chain Research Centre at Cranfield. So a very thorough piece of research. If you want a copy of the white paper, which is available to you, just write on the back of your business card, white paper, and give that to me, and I'll make sure you get the white paper. It makes interesting reading, because it is clear that in that, the modelling for strategic evaluation of options is an essential part of the strategic planning process. You may say that's obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious to many people, but it comes out very clearly as a key requirement. Not only to be able to evaluate options that you might want to happen and study, but for risk analysis and risk evaluation, which is clearly a key important thing to consider in today's risk-rich world. So that's important, but what is also very interesting is that the whole process of option development, strategic development, and implementation of strategy is a very, very difficult process for companies to undertake. The reason why we don't hear much about it is because it's carried out typically in secret. One of the clear outputs of this piece of research is that this is done within the company. It may involve consultants, but they will be working on a specific project, and the process and the output is not in the public domain. What is absolutely clear from the research is that the process is difficult. For example, 50% chance of success or failure. This was the key headline that that was caught up by the Times in England. That there's a 50% chance of success or failure if we don't pay attention to the things we need to do properly. So if we go into a strategic change agenda, then it's like tossing a coin. It may end up heads and it's going to work, or it may end up tails, it's going to fail. 3% of projects on time and to budget. 7% of projects abandoned completely. And that whole normal distribution with a 50% chance of success. That is not acceptable. What is also clear is that from that research, and when you read the white paper you will see this, that the barriers to change are not technical barriers. They're basically people barriers. Rich has talked about culture. The whole concept of what we call in FSO Consulting the high performance organization, the ability to grasp not just the cultural issues, but to grasp performance management in a cross-silo, in a strategic business sense, is absolutely critical. But it's actually a huge challenge. So performance management, the people issues contribute 80% of the barriers. But out of that white paper, you'll also see that there are ingredients for success, the things that are the get-rights. Modelling, risk analysis, evaluation, monitoring success of strategic projects is all part of that. And the fourth question that Don asked is, if it's so important, why aren't more people doing it? Well, I suggest they are doing it. As I said, it tends to be in secret, but we've seen a number of developments over the last couple of years. We've got SCM World in their annual survey 2 years ago identified revisiting the structure of supply chain networks. and also identified the need to integrate supply chain with business strategy. And that is now happening in more mature and advanced companies. I'm working with the Global Research Committee of the APIX Supply Chain Council, who have developed and implemented the SCORE model. But we're just upgrading the methodologies and the training information on management for supply chain, M4SC. Integration of business strategy with supply chain strategy, with supply chain structure design, with supply chain processes and resources. And we've created this very firm link with lots of examples of not only the way in which supply chain strategy is linked with business strategy and supporting it, but indeed in many cases supply chain strategy driving business strategy. Supply chain is in the boardroom. The white paper I talked about demonstrates through the information collected that over 50% of supply chain leaders sit in the executive board of their business unit. That's my cue to stop talking. We talked about innovation, and that's jazz, which is the true example of innovation. Innovation is about creating new ideas, but experience is knowing when to stop speaking. So I'm going to stop speaking. Those are my ideas. It's an exciting area. There's lots to do, but we have some challenges in moving forward. So let me move back and hand over back to Don. Thank you very much indeed.
Hello. Right. Alan, thank you for that. There's a lot we could pick up on, and we will, and we're going to keep rocking here with Christine.
Hello, good morning everybody. My name is Christine de Lille, and as many of you, I'm an academic, I'm a teacher, I'm a coach to students and to practitioners. From time to time, I'm a consultant, but far and foremost, I'm a designer. So I'm wondering how many of you are designers? Can I see some hands? Ah, that's good. I'm surprised with how many of you are designers. I'm happy to hear. What I want to get out of the way is, for me, design is not just styling. It's not just having a beautiful package or a nice surface from a product that functions. We as designers have moved towards creating value propositions to create products, services, systems, or maybe a combination of all of that together. And by doing so, we noticed as designers, we're having a huge impact on an organization. And one of the questions Don asked me in preparation for this talk is, so is design thinking in supply chains, is that all new? I'd say no, because we've been working with organizational design, with change management in organizations in order to deliver those value propositions already for years. Only we don't call it that. We call it design management, or we call it strategic design. And that's been going on already for 20 plus years. In the 80s that developed already. So where do I come from? After a detour, I came back to my alma mater, which is the Industrial Design Engineering faculty at Delft University of Technology. And to give you an idea of the scope and the amount of work we're dealing with, we have more than 2,000 students. That's both bachelor and master, and that's only in industrial design engineering. So no graphic design, no interaction design, purely on industrial design engineering. And we have 140 PhD students, all in design. So we have a huge scope. We're the largest and we're the oldest design faculty in the world, so we get a lot of momentum. And by doing so, we also reach a lot of companies. Is this new, what we do? Yes, also, because designers do a lot of in an intuitive way. We just do things and then only later on, oh, you're dealing with supply design. Oh, really? Are we? No, we're just doing our stuff in order to deliver that value proposition. So that's quite new to us to become aware that there's an entire field of supply-based design and that we can borrow from them. And in that sense, we are very much T-shaped, so we have that strength in design, but we also teach our students in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, manufacturing, materials, management, but also in the social sciences, because we want our students to be really a T-shaped designer. And I think that's one of our strengths, because we're very good in talking to different kinds of people, bringing them together, facilitating the conversation of different kinds of people. And I feel a little uncomfortable here, not because Dan told me absolutely no PowerPoints, and also not because I'm standing in front of you, well, maybe, but I feel uncomfortable because I cannot draw. When I have a discussion with somebody, I really want to convey a message, or I want to make sense of something that is a little bit more complex. I want to draw it out. So by drawing, I have something to reference to structure my thoughts, and to do that together with somebody else. If I look at my notebook, it's all drawings, and then at the moment of making them, they made a lot of sense. But when I now look back at them, I cannot understand them. But the important act is of doing that together, making sense of a complex situation, and for us, it's the drawing, it's the prototyping, it's all these methods that we have as designers that help in doing that. To give you an example of how we do that as designers in regard to supply-based design, one of the type of companies I work with a lot are manufacturing SMEs. So one of these SMEs came to me and they asked me, so we make these medical cards for operating rooms. You want to do something new. What is our future? We cannot make a new wheel or a new layout for medical cards anymore. What's the next thing? So we started looking with them. We went to the operating rooms. We talked to surgeons. We talked to the technical staff, the people in charge of maintenance, to the nurses. And we found out that they cannot do it alone. Whenever you start changing something in the context of an operating room, you start affecting the entire context of use. So what we started doing is, what are the possibilities in the future, and how can you really make a difference in operating rooms and bring together all the people from the supply chain? They're non-competing companies, but they all are part of the supply chain in an operating room. So you have a company in charge of the operating table, those in charge of the equipment and other things, and together we did the research and looked at the context of use. So how together as a supply chain can we really make a difference in an operating room? At the moment, the system is being rolled out in different hospitals in the Netherlands. And I think we could do that and make that difference, especially for SMEs, by combining their sources and their resources and making a difference in that context of use. So I think that context of use and making a new value proposition in which product, services, and systems are a part can really make a difference. Another thing that Don said over breakfast is he's stated, or maybe you want to state it yourself, about regulations.
Yeah. Right, so, wow. One of the questions we're going to get into, I think, also as a panel is, are there some industries where design is actually obviously more critically important? And I was speculating that in those industries that are more highly regulated, it isn't as important. There's less things you have to change, and your time and effort is better spent gaming regulations. And Christine violently disagreed and threw a drink at me. And that warranted follow-up.
Well, the drink at you, maybe next time I'll do
Metaphorically.
that. Well, it doesn't come, for me it's not right because I work in the aviation industry. I'm guessing that most of you flew over and sat down in an aircraft. And you know, the aviation industry is very much regulated and all revolves around safety. So it's tech-driven, it's about weight, fuel costs, safety, new kinds of materials, things like that. And that's how that industry has been evolving. And I took upon the challenge together with some colleagues to change that industry. Because when you're sitting in that cabin, I want to see some hands here. Who of you say that cabin has radically changed in the past 5 years? Has it changed in the past 5 years? In the past 10 years? 30 years? 40 years? Well, what we see is that the basic concept of what a cabin looks like today originated from Pan Am in the 70s when they introduced this trolley to have a better service to serve more people in the airplane. But the basic concept of having crew members with lines, with trolleys, handing out food hasn't changed whatsoever. I think that's terrible. Why are we still sitting in rows? I was at the Airbus assembly facility in Toulouse in June, and I was walking around in 2 aircrafts that were still being assembled, the Korean Air and the Singapore Airlines. They were dated. They were exactly the same of what's flying around at the moment, and they will be flying around for 20 more years. So how can you change that system? For example, an airport cannot exist without an airline, and an airline cannot exist without an airport. What we're doing is looking at the common denominator, and that's the passenger. So we're looking at the entire journey of a passenger and what they're experiencing. And by looking at that passenger and what the supply chain has in common, we bring them together and we say, what you have in common is a passenger. Because the industry in itself is going crazy because companies are going bankrupt because they cannot deliver in time. So we need to find another proposition. And for airlines, differentiation at the moment is just, it's crazy. The price reduction has gone to an end that we cannot reduce prices anymore. So what are you going to offer to passengers? And it's there that we really want to make a difference, bringing together the supply chain and having different talks. So we're not setting up discussions and talks between salespeople and purchasers. No, we're talking with crew members and those designing the cabin in itself, and really talk about crew processes, crew service routines, and passenger experiences. And by doing so, I think we can really make a difference. And I already noticed with some of the suppliers that they start talking differently with their crew members and with airlines. And they're already noticing that they come, the clients, the airlines come with different kind of questions. Instead of, can you certify this? They come with, hey, we have a problem, can you help us solve it? And I think that's the first starting ground where we with design thinking can really make a difference in a very tight industry. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm going to slightly stand my ground and kick this back around a little bit, because one of the things I was making one of the points I was making particularly ineloquently is, in order for change of any kind, or design, which is fundamental transformational change, to occur, there has to be the thinking that it's possible. And we definitely see a large number of organizations that sort of give up on fundamental transformation because they say, well, I can't change enough. And I think there are some industries that are shackled more, and but organizations also shackle themselves. And I'm sure everybody's heard about the tiger with the cage, and if he's in there, the cage, long enough, you just leave the door open because he'll never leave. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Google tiger cage transformation. All right, continue on. Salvatore, you have some ideas on these topics.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone, again. So when Professor Gatorna asked me to join this conference and this panel, I was very happy, because actually is design thinking not anymore a nice to have, but is definitely a must to have. And I want to share with you not just the what or why this is needed, but the how. So how we could, through the design thinking, improve and innovate our way to manage supply chain. So my name is Salvatore Paparelli. I am the head of Logistics Europe and the head of the sales operations. And I will come back on this point later on. So what happened in our industry was unique. Everything that could change definitely changed. And this is very, very unique. The production side, where to produce, how to supply, where to distribute. Our dealers changed completely, from being a papa-mama to be a big enterprise, even bigger than industry sometimes. Our consumers changed. Our product changed. Our technology changed. So we were religiously following Murphy's Law. Everything that could go wrong in our industry did. So it was not anymore a matter of being like we were in the past, like industry-driven, making products and shipping to the consumers. We didn't care about the consumer needs. We just wanted to produce and ship. So we moved from push, so just produce and ship, into pull. We changed later on in demand planning. So how much the consumer wanted and how we can produce and supply. So supply chain was always following, let me say, the industry-driven operation we used to have. But then, over a sudden, again, following Murphy's Law, everything changed again. And we could not anymore cope with just producing what the consumer wanted. We had to produce what the wish of the consumer were coming through. So we wanted to understand, we had to understand what the consumer wanted. So see the world from our consumer's eyes, and then design ourselves in order to cope with that need. So it was not easy. It was not an easy process, but we had to go through it. So that's why design thinking is not in supply chain just nice to have anymore. We needed to really reinvent ourselves, and we needed to make sure that by observing the world, observing what was happening, we could see things from different angles. We could see things from different before implementing anything. So that was a big change. That was the trigger for everything. So the change was not easy. What we had to do was to change from being a very, you have seen earlier on, this T-shape that Professor Wilding has made us making the exercise in the morning. So we had to change the way we were designing our way to supply products to the consumers. So it came from our mind earlier that to make this change, we needed to understand the way organizations were working. So we were very much, silos. You saw earlier on the silos bit, but very concrete silos, so difficult to break. And when you want to, redesign yourself, you have to go through a couple of steps. The main step was moving from hierarchical-driven organization into process-driven organization. That was a big, big step. Because you have to make, if you want to design a proper supply chain flow, if you want to apply design thinking, not just improving step by step the way you do supply chain, you have to make sure that all the silos, all the parts of the process are linked together. So those silos we had in the past were broken up, and I tell you, this was the biggest challenge ever. And process owner, so the one who could go through the process, were established. And that made the challenge a possible challenge. So you heard about T-shape. Actually, I was lucky enough in my career to work in marketing, sales. I'm a sales and marketing person. Then I moved into operations, European operation as well. And I became also managing director. And 3 years ago, I took over logistics and supply chain in Europe, as well as, and this is, I'm coming back to the point earlier on, as well as the sales operation as well. So the whole back office sales order processing. So we wanted to link the end-to-end process from supply down to serving the consumers. So that was a very, very challenging design thinking way of working that we wanted to establish. And that was very successful. We are now managing under one umbrella in a very process-driven organization, yet customer-centric, meaning understanding, observing the customers, continuously redesigning our operation, our supply chain, from sourcing down to the delivery to the dealers, under one single umbrella. That was a breakthrough we went through, and that was the way to make sure that people, process, team-based process and way of working was established. In the past, we used to take decisions in 3 possible ways: by experience, by intuition, and by knowledge. By experience in our market, as I mentioned earlier, everything changed. It was not good enough anymore. You base your decision on past experience, it's not going to work. You base your experience just on your intuition. In the past, it was possible. The gut feeling, I think I'm going to sell 10,000 of this model. And everyone would say, oh, good, let's do it. Anyway, we were producing and shipping, so we could do that. Or with knowledge. You analyze, you go through the details, you understand it, and then you take a decision. Each of these 3 steps could lead to a possible success or failure according to the time you took that decision. Design thinking is bringing a 4th dimension. You don't use your experience only. You don't use your gut feeling only. You don't use your knowledge only. You use the 3 of them together with exploring by observing any other option you have in mind. And you can do this through people which have, and that's why I'm here, not just one specific knowledge, but someone who has got a broad understanding of the whole market, your consumers, your partners, your supply, everything. You should know to lead this everything. So you should not be a specialist. you should be, I mean narrow especially, you should be definitely, to lead this change, to lead design thinking, a broad generalist which has got as well the ability to understand the future trends, to redesign yourself through design thinking in order to make it happening, even when people don't even see it today. So this is the way you redesign your company, you redesign your supply. But to do that, you also need to understand that your preparation to do that should come from your intuition, definitely, your analytical skills, and here is where in between you put the design thinking, and through the information you get. In English, information means data in formation, so nothing yet concretely done, but just some elements to drive you, together with the experience, to the knowledge. But as we have heard before, information and knowledge itself, plus experience, is not enough anymore. If you want to work in a design thinking organization, you need to make the full organization working in that way. You need to make people not reporting, that was nice, people not reporting to you, working with you. So you can see here thought leadership. Thought leadership is absolutely paramount to implement that. But together with that, you also need to develop a lateral leadership. When you work in a process-driven organization, focusing on the customer needs, so observing the customer needs, you cannot simply apply the basic process to your organization. You need to make people not reporting to you, working for you. So the thought leadership that you have heard, together with the lateral leadership, which allow you to manage organizations which do not report in all the way to you, makes the design thinking process really worthwhile. So at the end, through a design thinking, redesign of your own organization, you need to have the ability not to limit your challenge, but to challenge your limit continuously. And as I said, it's really worthwhile. And as everything worth, you know, is never for free. So that's the reason why it's a tough job, but it's really, really worthwhile to do it.
Very good. So we'll keep going through to give everybody a chance to talk, but I'm sure we'll have questions for Salvatore about how things have worked at Sony and what are the questions I'll put out there to get thinking about. It seems as Sony is known for being a place where design is integrated throughout the organization. So what are the difficulties that you've had to overcome to get it working in supply chain? What's the biggest challenge you've faced? You want to answer that now, or do you want to wait till later? We'll go through the panel and then think about that one, because I'll ask everybody, what's stopping us? What's stopping design from working? Volker. I won't start your clock until you get up there.
Won't take too long. I'll try to keep it short. I have major four points, but first I would like to say who I am and what I do. I am the managing director and former founder of a company who does consulting in the field of supply chain management, but also like Don does, and we cooperate. I can say we produce software for supply chain design and planning. We are about 60 people based in Karlsruhe, southwest Germany. And the major clients we have are, of course, the major German automotive companies, where we do supply chain planning, so on the inbound side or upstream, you would call it, and of course, then also distribution. Now, we do about 60, maybe 60 projects a year, and this is more about planning and less about design, I must say. Of course, all these customers are primarily interested in savings. So we do simulations on transportation, on inventory management and processes, well, of course, on the overall layout of a supply chain. And of course, some of our customers ask us also, how should we develop our supply chain until the year 2020? And that's always, of course, a very interesting question. And there we come to the from inside out or outside in design, as Mr. Gattona puts it, and I think he is completely right on that. Many of our clients have traditionally an inside-out perspective. So what they want to see is they in a way stick to the way they procure today, they procure and they sell today, and they forecast that also for the future. Only if you take the opportunity to really redesign the supply chain and think of completely, let's say, completely different ways of doing their business. It's interesting that, of course, since all our projects are very data-driven, we hit some other limitations. If we want to do a simulation, let's say, for the year 2020, how to derive data for that? If we come to a conclusion, if the, let's say, customer behavior changes until the year 2020, how to generate these data and how to do the planning. So these are actually the challenges we do. Of course, in each project, there is some kind of a simulation to do that, and there's a solution for that, and but it's always a challenge. What we also see is still that many of our clients do not really have a supply chain visibility. When you ask a question, what have been your, let's say, supply chain costs in China last quarter, most of our clients wouldn't be able to answer that. This is, I think, a lack of functionality in the ERP systems, and also there is a large gap between financial systems and supply chain management functions. Besides that, most ERP systems do not offer sufficient support for supply chain management, not to talk about supply chain design. I do not even know one ERP system which does support any kind of design or simulation. There might be special aspects which could be simulated. So this is my current perception of the situation. Now, but it changes. For example, one of our major clients is Daimler, and they have just lately installed a supply chain director, taking care of end-to-end from supplier to dealership, the whole supply chain, producing and selling cars. So this gives new aspects to the idea of design, and there are many, of course, opportunities to improve the supply chain. Third point would be that in my personal experience in my career, there have been some new designs, I would like to say. One was also connected with Daimler when they started to build the smart car, which is about 15 years ago. The smart car, it was a complete new design, as you know. It was very unusual for the whole company because it was a very small car. And the whole car, as you might know, is being assembled within 4 hours only. 4 hours of labor, yeah. So the whole car is manufactured in a way which is untypical. And they put, in the beginning, they put a different organization aside of the Daimler organization to make a complete new design of every function. Also, how to procure, how to manufacture, how to sell, everything. It was eyed by the conventional, by the conservative Daimler organization, very suspicious, as you can imagine. Halfway, they maybe secretly, they little bit thought, I hope they do not come up with new ideas. And the Daimler organization, they looked at it, you know, and occasionally every quarter, and then they said, Well, this is teenager research. So finally, they came up, they had some good ideas, but of course, in the end, the scale effects of this big Daimler organization absorbed many of the operations functions of SMART. So only a few of the good ideas have then been put in place. Another example I have is textile companies. I think textile companies are volatile. Oh, big brother. Okay, so textile companies are in a very volatile environment, I think. Volatile in many aspects. First, from procuring. You know, everybody, all we wear comes from, not from here, not from Europe, from China, from Vietnam, from Bangladesh. And the procuring areas are changing rapidly. And now they introduce even Africa as a procuring region. And also the styles vary. And there are labels, you know, they come up, they live for a certain period of time, and then they go down again. So it's very volatile, and there was one customer, I wouldn't like to mention it, but who invented the whole business, including the supply chain, and he made dramatic changes to all his competitors. He didn't have 4 seasons, he had 12. He didn't sell when the merchandise was available, he sold it before. He made the designs, then he produced samples, he sold according to the samples, and 2 or 3 months later, then the actual textiles were available. So this was very smart, and the company was really successful. They grew about at a growth rate of 30% for 5 years in a row. But then somehow this person left. He was also old by then, and then the company, in a way, declined again. But the design of this, I would say, is a very good example of how design, not only of the supply chain, but maybe of the overall way of doing business, has made this company successful. Okay, so of course there is a need for design. So from my point of view, as with a history of a planner and a designer, the question I would like to pose, and also in a way, maybe in the future answer, maybe together with Don, when we do designs and supply chain, in the end we need figures. No management will decide anything without figures. So the question is, how do we construct simulation and optimization software which fulfills the requirements of design? Design, in a way, is a little bit playing around, trying out things. And no software so far, unless I do not know the latest developments of Lamasoft, no simulation or planning software does fulfill this requirement. So that's where we have live up to in the future.
I'd say we're working on it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one brief comment about that, because design thinking is in the title of this thing. And if you look at the formal steps in design thinking, one of the, they talk a lot about putting the customer first, customer experience, integrative thinking, but also prototyping, playing with prototypes, making models. And it's no wonder that whenever we start talking about design, software and software modeling sticks in the middle of that. Because indeed, yes, you have to get the numbers, but it's also how we play with things, because they won't let us go play with the supply chain, because really, really bad things happen when you experiment with the supply chain and you don't know what's going to happen.
Can I do it in real?
Yes, well, you get to do those kind of experiments probably once at that company. Very good. And last but definitely not least, Byron.
It's a bit daunting seeing myself up on the screen there. I'm probably not the best guy to be up there, but let's see. I'm a property guy. I'm not a supply chain guy. So I don't know who else here is a property guy. If you put your hands up, I doubt there's many. There's one over there. Not many. So what am I doing here? I specialise in supply chain, in properties that support the supply chain industry. I've been working in property for about 35 years. I started when I was a teenager, and I love it. I love everything about it and enjoy it, get passionate about it. I'll just give you a bit of information about the property industry on a global scale, because it's really quite interesting. When I started in industrial property about 35 years ago, a yield, which is, if you know what a property yield is, it's the rent you get compared to the value of the property. So if you've got a high rent and a low value, you're getting a good yield. You get a high yield. You get a lot of money out of that property as an owner. Or if you've got a low rent and a high value property, you get a low yield. The lower the yield, it means a lot of people are trying to buy that property. It pushes the capital value up, but the rent stays the same. So if there's a lot of demand, you get a low yield. If not many people want the property, you get a high yield. The property value goes down, but the rent stays the same. When I started 35 years ago, yields for industrial property were around 12%, 13%. Now they're about 5%. It's a massive change. So when you look at your rental portfolio and you say, hey, how much rent are we paying? You'll notice that in the last 10 or 15 years, if you look on a global scale, and it varies from market to market, rents haven't changed that much. You know, I know one market where rents 15 years ago were about 100 a metre. Now they're about 100 a metre. Why is that? It's because yields have compressed. Yields are tighter. Costs have gone up in developing new property for sure, but yields have compressed, creates a static rental market. Now, what's that got to do with design thinking? It's really interesting. What's it got to do with design thinking? What's happened over the last 30 years is these trusts have appeared. Goodman, Prologis, you know them all. These big fellas who are building big sheds globally, chasing these properties, driving the yields down, flattening out rents. Now, 15 years ago, I was asked by a very large corporate to help deliver $1 billion worth of real estate in industrial property. Can you go and fetch that? We said, okay, I'll have a look at that. This is the first time I'm doing a really large global sort of footprint for their market anyway of industrial property. So I went out to the market and first of all I said to them, what do you want? And they said, well, we want a rectangle and we want a low rent. And that was the sophistication of the demand from the client, from the occupier, the operator, which surprised me. So I went to the market and I said to the developers, hey, these guys, they need a new shed. What do you usually provide? And they said, well, we provide a rectangle and we provide a low rent and a good lunch. And if you do a deal with us, you'll get dinner as well. And I thought, well, there's got to be more to it than that. So when I went back in, I said, let's go into the operators and go inside their sheds. And I started talking to the people on the ground and saying, hey, what do you need? What do you need? And they said, you know, what we need is we need a fan to blow inside the container when we're working there. It's so darn hot in there. Or we need a light so we can see inside. Or we need a cable that comes so the RF will work. They needed that kind of thing. And they said, have a look at that. We've got a skylight that sits over the top of the racking. It should be over the top of the aisle so we have more light. And he said, that's a bit silly. And the slab, it cracks or it's not flat. And have a look at this dock level that they put in there. It needs 2 people to operate it, not 1. It increases our operating costs. So I go back to the developers, and these guys are worldwide now. They're big guys. They're compressing the yields. They're delivering a lot of sheds. Rents are great. But when you say to them, why did you put that dock level in? They say, why not? I mean, who asked for anything different? So, okay, there's got to be a better way. There's a mismatch here. The guys inside the shed are unhappy. The guys at head office, they're fine. The rents look fine. And the developers, they got no idea. So I said, we'll go to the agents. So I go across the agents, what do you think? They say, where do you want to have lunch? They want to talk about lunch, and they talk about rent and a rectangle. So nothing there, knocking on, there's no one home in that space. So we go, okay, we need to really focus on this area, and we started to develop options and a brief around what's possible from an operator's perspective in detail. And then we started to look from the developer's perspective, what have they got? Like in time and dock levelers, what dock levelers are out there? And in detail, why are they different? Let's understand that in detail. With the thickness of the steel in the shed, why is it what it is? Does it matter? Is it important or not? It looks the same, it's painted the same, but why are they different? Why does it matter? Why does it matter if it's a 1.5 degree pitch roof or 2 degree or 2.5? Why is that important? Who is that important to? Let's understand that. And when we talk about the developer, where's he getting his money from? Is it his money? Does he own the land actually? Is it his land? Whose risk is it? Let's really get underneath this, that situation and understand in detail actually how does he put a deal together and what makes him excited and what makes him unhappy. Let's jump into a lease. Why are they all different? And what's the difference? And what matters and what doesn't matter? Let's understand that lease in detail. From an operating perspective, a design perspective, how do they want to use the shed now? And how will they want to use it later? What flexibility are they looking for from the building? Let's understand that. How does that relate back to the P&L? Where's the money in all this? Where's the operating benefit for looking for? How does it relate to the CapEx spend? So we started to work in this space and really work in this space. We thought, this is really interesting. We got a lot out of it. And then we said, well, okay, maybe we should start a company around that. And we created this company called Exact Solutions about 10 years ago and started helping other companies in this space. And we've done now, I don't know, 60 or 80 sheds or something. But, you know, we like a shed when it's bigger than 10,000 square metres. So they're big fellas. We're just closing one now. It's a 5% yield, which is really tight. We're closing it this week at 60,000 square metres. It's a ripper. But what we love about it is what's in the shed. How does it work? How does it work for the operator? And how's he going to get the benefit out of it? How does he get flexibility out of a rectangle? How does he do that? So that's where we've been working in our space. We've been enjoying that. We get a lot of fun out of it. And I know, you know, most of you here aren't property guys. I hope you love sheds like we do. There's more to it than just a rectangle and a rent and a good lunch and dinner if you do a deal. But that's the space we've been exploring.
Very good. So we're already getting the hook, but we're going to do one lightning round. Biggest challenge to overcome. I have two questions for everybody up here before we get pulled off the stage. Biggest challenge, what's holding back design? And do you have anybody who does it well? Let's go, Alan. Biggest challenge.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, Don, the biggest challenge, I think, is the implementation of strategic change, which sounds a bit gobbledygook, but it's basically how do we actually make the business work differently, quickly enough? And that's a huge challenge. Within that, as I said, it's the people issues, particularly grasping the cross-functional issues, getting people working off the same agenda, getting the change management issues in line. Who does it well? Well, there's one company, a global, I was mentioning this over dinner over breakfast, or was it dinner last night? I can't remember. Some companies now have a continuous process of strategic design with an in-house team. One global automotive manufacturer, 27 people working full-time on strategic, continuous redesign of the global supply chain on a continuous basis. Not necessarily moving the factories, because that's a long schedule, but deciding where those, which parts of the world those facilities are sourcing. And you know, the big sheds are there, but how do we use them? So there is some best practice out there. It's very, very variable, and we've got a lot of work to do.
Very good. Biggest challenge, who does it well?
Who does it well? Zodiac Aerospace. They're one of the suppliers in cabin interiors that I work with. They're not there yet, but give them just a couple more years and they will be there. So I'm quite impressed with how they've really changed their corporate culture towards including design thinking. The challenges we have is long-term versus short-term considerations, how to find a balance in that. And as designers, we work well on value propositions, but then the next big step is getting them there and operational.
Very good. Salvatore, biggest challenge, what do you got?
Yeah, changing the organization, definitely, and making sure that the customer centricity was embedded. So changing the logic that if you don't have a customer, even inside the company, inside the process, you don't have a job. That is where the most important challenge we have to face. Who does it well in our industry?
Besides Sony.
Of course. And we do it well, so I cannot mention that. But anyway, who does it well right now are the companies which have been already designed in a supply chain way. So supply chain becomes core competence rather than the product itself. So the importance has been shifted from being a super innovative supply chain and continuous improvement rather than being focused on product.
All right. Volker, biggest challenge, who does it well?
The biggest challenge, I think, is a change in the state of mind. And, well, as you said already, changing processes, yeah, changing organization, which makes a prosperous design process possible. Who does it well? Sony.
Well, that's a softball. Byron, biggest challenges out there for design thinking?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge in the supply chain world for design thinking is that most CFOs and CEOs and board members do not come from the logistics world. It's really rare. You know, it's really rare. So, you know, when you start talking about SKUs, they actually don't know what a SKU is. Okay? So, you know, supply chain people talk another language. As a property guy, when I started, I didn't know what a SKU was. I thought it was a skew on a bell curve, you know, like a mean distribution skew. It took me about an hour into a meeting when I realized they're talking about something completely different. So for CEOs and CFOs and board members who are time poor, they just don't even understand what you're doing now, let alone what you want to do. I think that's a big obstacle. What was the second question?
Who does it well?
Who does it well? Our experience, and we've worked for literally hundreds of clients now, is private equity. And this is interesting because when private equity come in, they are dispassionate in terms of who's who in the zoo in the organisation. All they want is to make more money. So if you go to them and say, if you do this, you'll make more money, you've got their attention. So they're happy, they'll kill anyone, you know, to make more money. So they don't, you know, all this divisional stuff, they'll just cut through all that. So that's been our experience.
Okay. The right answer. The biggest challenge is people. Supply chains are made out of people. It's the simplest and the hardest thing to get you yourself to look at your own life differently and step out from that. Then trying to get everybody else to go implement it. That's the second hardest thing, isn't it? The right answer for who does this best, I think nobody does it all that well, quite frankly. And at LlamaSoft, we love all of our customers differently, but the same. So I'll just say, if you want to know more about that, talk to some of our customers and talk to the guys up here. Thanks very much for your attention. Thanks to the panel and to John and Evangelos for organizing a fantastic event. Appreciate it.
John, please stay seated for a moment because we're all going to be leaving the room in just a second. There's a couple of things I need to say. Thank you to Panel 1 and to Don Hicks. Thank you very much, Don. I've had a little advice from the great designer himself, John Katorna, about how these panels should work. We're running a bit behind time, I'm afraid, rather badly. And what he suggested is a couple of things. One is that the seating down there on the side there is designed so that the panel works as a panel rather than all coming up here and making a separate speech. So subsequent panels, please just stay there and give you a little piece with your mics. That's why you're fitted with mics. And don't come back and forth because it takes a fair bit of time and it all ends up stretching it out. And the second thing is everybody's got a page every panelist has got a page in the little book So there's no need to repeat what's in the page. Just let's get on with the thought leadership. That's the important stuff for us today. So thank you very much. Now, panel 2, please stay behind because we've got to check the AV that that's all in order. But everybody else, it's time for a break. Outside, you will find Big Olive. They're an agency that's arranging some tours on Thursday. There's wonderful things to see in Athens. So if you're interested, please go and talk to them. And please be back by 11:30. Okay, we've got 15 minutes. Thank you very much.